I would say that's the biggest parallel between, SEAL teams or special operations and super successful entrepreneurs is that they just will not quit. Every one of them, has gone through multiple bankruptcies. They've been in positions where they're putting their power bill on a fucking credit card,
Yep.
To try to survive. And this is 10 years into it after they've owned 3 businesses that made millions of dollars and then they lost everything, and these are guys that just, it's like quitting and failing isn't an option, or, failing is just a pivot. It's not a finality. Reaffirming that mindset as being one that's really necessary and crucial for being a successful entrepreneur, coupled with really, really intelligent and wisdom and experience-driven ideologies and strategies to approaching business, and realizing that there isn't really a playbook to it, which is what I find probably the most enjoyable and fascinating about entrepreneurship, is that, all of that burden rests on my shoulders, which, while stressful, there's nothing more rewarding than when you're the guy that has to make the decisions and you're the zero or the hero and you make it.
My next guest is a modern-day badass, an ex-Navy SEAL, a world-renowned dog trainer, a best-selling author, and the host of the Mic Drop podcast. But how much could we possibly have in common with a cat like that, with so many accomplishments? You're about to find out on the Uncommon Souls podcast. Help me in welcoming my good friend, Mike Ritland. We touched a little bit just before when we first met. We talked a little bit about you were a moderate, average athlete, whatever, as a kid, and played a bunch of different sports. But one of the sports I noted that you participated in was you were a swimmer.
Right.
So when you were growing up, does it seem like you, amongst other fellow SEALs, were either into water sports or some kind of extreme cardio sport? Because it seems like, obviously, even to gain entry into something like, it's a lot more than a cardio capacity team, obviously, but that's a baseline. Did you see that, a lot of that? Sort
of. I would say, two things. One, the entrance test, physical exam wise, or physical test wise, is not very reflective of training. So I would say, the test is really not that hard to pass. It's a 500-yard swim, a 1.5-mile run, max pull-ups, max sit-ups, max push-ups. And the swim, I don't even remember what the time is. I think it's something like 12 minutes or something. And the run, same. It's like 11:30, I think, for a 1.5 miles, which is not fast.
Okay.
Push-ups, it's 42. Sit-ups is 52. And pull-ups, I think, is 6. So
are those timed or just?
You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay.
But, so that by itself, the only, I would say, relatively challenging part that I've seen surprise guys come in is that it's all back to back. You do the swim, the pull-ups, the push-ups, the sit-ups, the run, and there's very little break between it. So that can catch some people off guard. But, if you're not destroying that test, 2, 3, 4 times the numbers that are required to pass, training is going to be extra challenging. Now, having said that, to your question, it's really all walks of life. There is a significant contingent of athletes that are in swimming, water polo, wrestling, and football. Those are probably the 4 most common ones.
Okay.
But you see, cross country runners, you see, even tennis players or whatever. You see some people that grew up on a farm, never played any sports. You see some, Ivy League lacrosse players. Even in my first platoon, we had a guy that graduated with a master's in finance from Columbia and was on Wall Street and joined at 30, which he had to get an age waiver. So was on Wall Street for a number of years, very successful, and just kind of woke up one day and felt like a pussy and decided he wanted to do something way different and more hardcore. And so, and everything in between, you have all walks of life. And that's the other part of that too, is even some of the most talented and gifted athletes that I saw, because, spending 3.5 years as an instructor, you have a good idea of kind of what's going on as a student, but nowhere near like you do when you're behind the curtain.
You get to see the innards.
Yeah. But what you realize again, even as a student, but especially as an instructor, you realize trying to bet on or predict who's going to make it and who doesn't based on just kind of what you see is a fruitless effort. You'll be surprised both ways every single time. There's guys that you would swear, that's a solid dude, great athlete, hard worker, humble, team player, going to make it for sure, quits 3 hours into Hell Week, and then you see this country bumpkin that's built like a thumb, barely passes the test, isn't very bright, is clumsy, doesn't get along with guys very well, and that fucking guy is sitting there at the end of training.
Doesn't know any better than to pass.
Yeah. Just has never had a choice but to finish, growing up, type of stuff. So it is really weird and very inconsistent and very unpredictable. So while there is a significant, portion of the population of SEAL students and SEALs that ultimately make it through, there is a wide variety of backgrounds.
So in your experience then with water sports and then martial arts, you're into martial arts as well still?
Still, yeah.
Okay. So how much of that played into it, and how did you end up actually getting into the martial arts aspect? Because you say you were an average athlete.
Yeah.
At what point did you get into the martial arts, and kind of what spawned that?
Sure. So the average athlete part kind of ebbed and flowed a little bit. I would say I was a good swimmer, but I wasn't, up until 7th grade, I was pretty competitive statewide with kids my age, because we were in, year-round USS swim clubs and competed, all the time, went to swim meets all over the state and even a few outside of the state. And I could hang with even the best guys. I was competitive, but I got really burnt out because I started at 5. I took part of 7th grade and all of 8th grade off, and then joined the high school team in the fall of 9th grade. And in that window of taking that time off, they catapulted ahead of me, and now I was pretty average.
Okay.
I still, a couple years, three or maybe, 3 of the 4 years I went to state, but I didn't podium. I competed, but was certainly nothing special.
And that's more typical of today's youth sports that end up being year round and all these AAU leagues.
Yeah, back then it was a little more rare to play, especially in my hometown. There weren't a ton of sports to play. Like my high school, they have a soccer team now. They didn't. Like we didn't even have a soccer team.
Okay.
Certainly didn't have lacrosse, didn't have water polo, had just kind of the main primary sports. But where the martial arts component came in was my freshman year. I was pretty small for my age in 9th and 10th grade. And I got jumped when I was in my freshman year pretty bad. And it just, that was a pivotal moment for me in a number of ways. But one of them was, wanting to join martial arts and get some sort of involvement into some sort of combatives to be able to do better than I did that time, and it was a really unique and neat experience and opportunity for me because it wasn't a commercial outfit. It was an underground dojo that was run by a female who was like 5'2", but weighed probably 140 and was just kind of a brick shit house and
in a Santos type.
Yeah, but was very competent and it was based off of traditional Okinawan karate. Her sensei was a Vietnam force recon, multi-tour combat vet, and was a total badass, hard ass, very competent guy. And so it was real old school, very traditional, super strict underground. Like she taught it in her basement, so there were no advertisements. There were, it was like total word of mouth.
Love it.
And my dad actually came across her. She was hired. My dad worked for John Deere for 40 some years. And there came a point where they put a bunch of emphasis on physical fitness, put a bunch of gyms in every one of their facilities. And they hired trainers to come in. And so they hired this gal. And so that's how he found out about it. And then he mentioned to her, like, hey, I have a son that, is interested, is that something, you could work out or whatever. And she said, well, I'll interview him and meet with him and see if he's
even cooler. So
yeah.
You can't even just sign up.
No, nothing to do with money. It was all about, the passion for the sport of it. And so, I met with her and she said, we'll try it out and see how it goes. And it was neat because it was almost kind of the Karate Kid type of relationship of, I didn't have a job at that time, didn't have any money. And so I worked the dues off. I mowed her yard and cleaned her house and did chores around the house and stuff to pay for the training and whatever. But what was really neat about it, this was before even the first UFC ever existed. And back then, I didn't know of any other. I'm sure there were some, but it was very rare to see hybrid gyms that would do multiple different disciplines. And she absolutely did that. So like in the summertime, we would do Filipino stick fighting and knife fight, and knife fighting and do all of our training outside where it's super hot and nasty out in Iowa. And then in the wintertime, we were in the basement and we would do more boxing, wrestling, French foot fighting, judo, so we mixed a lot of other things into it. It was really like a kind of before its time MMA gym.
Yeah.
What was even cooler about it is that she understood, just like I think any good MMA coach understands today, that everybody, has different styles and games, to the way that they're going to approach their competency. And so the way that she would, focus on certain aspects of training with me is going to be different than the 38-year-old female sheriff's deputy. That's going to be different than the 50-year-old father of 5 that or other kids or whatever. There was maybe 12 to 15 of us, I think, that trained there.
Yeah, because you can only handle
so many.
Doing an individual plan for so many people.
She did have two black belts and a brown belt that were at a high level that also helped out a lot. But she kind of tailored focusing on different disciplines that suited your body type and athleticism and stuff like that. So it was really groundbreaking for its time.
Yeah.
But she was also big into some of the kind of that traditional Okinawan Mr. Miyagi kind of karate stuff of like walking over broken glass and
really
doing a lot of like mental strength training and the training was also really intense. Most of the classes, you never knew how long they would be. You had no idea, what you would be doing. Sometimes it would be a lot of calisthenics and not even that much training, not very often. But she would call them smoke sessions. She was married to a guy who was in the Army, and so there was a lot of influence of that kind of boot camp type of mentality, also kind of buffered into it. But and for belt testing too, sometimes she would say, "Hey, on March 17th, you're going to be up for purple belt or whatever," and other times you'd walk in for a normal class and it would last 3 hours. And you'd get shark tanked by the entire fucking crew, having no idea that you were testing for the next belt. And then at the end, you get a belt, so it was,
wow.
It kind of always kept you guessing and on your toes. But to be able to experience that at 15, 16, 17, 18, was really helpful for kind of connecting the physical and mental piece. And I think for sure played a significant role in my ability to go to SEAL training as a brand new 18-year-old and make it. So, I'm super thankful for that opportunity and being able to be a part of that. As I get older, I reflect on it fairly often and just feel incredibly lucky that it was there, because most kids didn't get to experience something like that.
So in that, and I'm quite familiar with some of those trainings. A lot of what I did too, and I also felt like it was a lot before my time too. Training on apartment tennis courts and crap like that. Overly hot, not much of a mat to land on and stuff like that. But it's significantly practical. Yeah. Did she have anything to address with you in particular regarding your motivation for doing it? And was your motivation to kick ass, or was it? I know in traditional martial arts, it's all about being the peacemaker. Right. Was that your intention, or did she do any of that? Yeah, I
mean, I told her the primary motivator for wanting to do it, and I think she was empathetic towards that, and but definitely made it clear that this isn't about picking fights, and right. I think because Karate Kid was such a big part of guys in our age range, our childhoods, where there was so fewer movies and shows the way that there are now. You had Rambo and Commando and RoboCop and Karate Kid and Predator, and it's like there weren't thousands of movies on Netflix to choose from, and so there were some kind of key AA personality, cool guy movies that were incredibly impactful, I think, for our age range. And so I already kind of had an understanding of what the mentality was like, but she definitely, questioned me on why I was there, and made it abundantly clear that, one, that she runs the show. I mean, we would, bow with eye contact, going in and out of the room. It was really, really regimented in terms of rank and file, and, kind of like formations in boot camp or police academies. Like if you got in trouble and had to do push-ups, like even something as simple as you had to turn your belt around so that none of it would touch the ground, almost like a flag.
Interesting.
When you're putting your belt on and off, if any of it touched the ground, like she would take it from you and you'd have to earn it back. I mean, it was like super strict that way. And I loved it. I mean, it was really impactful and formidable for that age that I was at, but.
How did you was there a lot of sparring? So I know nowadays it's gone one way and then it's kind of come back the other way, where there's a lot more emphasis on ground fighting because you can go so much more intensely in your training, but you only want to be hit in the head so many times when you're working Muay Thai and stuff. Yeah,
especially in teenage years. I mean, even as an adult, it's not great, but especially children. There's been enough studies where, full contact to the head.
But there weren't then.
Right.
I mean, it weren't in my time either. I mean, it was
So, I mean, we did a fair bit of sparring, both ground fighting, judo-wise, wrestling, as well as we would put headgear on and use gloves, and they were boxing gloves, not MMA gloves. So, but there definitely was. And that was the first time I had ever really been in a fight where I was fighting, like I'd been jumped a number of times where it was just trying to survive. There's dozens of people just kicking the shit out of you. And so it was the first time, that I had ever kind of really been in a fight, where I was fighting back anyway. And the first sparring partner I had was, I don't think she was in her 30s, I think. But it was a woman. She was bigger than I was. She was a sheriff's deputy. And so, for me, growing up as not a farm kid, but as a more kind of rural environment farm kid type in Iowa with, very kind of gentleman type of upbringing, I'm like, wait, I'm supposed to hit a woman? Like,
this already not fair.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. Well, it wasn't even a not fair thing. I was just like, this doesn't feel right.
Right. I mean, it's not fair because you don't know how hard to go. Or
and so I'm like unsure, and she could see that. And I think, so she's like, fucking do it, and so she leans back and just cracks me with a fucking right cross, and I was like, holy shit, that went out the window right away. My my apprehension for sparring with a woman. But so it was enormously helpful. But we did do a fair bit of sparring. We also did kind of keep the nod to the traditional katas that you see in karate specifically, where it's the choreographed movements that you learn and have to memorize for belt as part of belt testing. Didn't spend a ton of time on it. It was more just, again, kind of a nod to the tradition of it. But we wouldn't. Most of the training we did was either pad work or sparring or technique drilling.
Man, that's you were lucky at that time for sure. We've seen where that's gone now. Yeah. And so when you say you were jumped, and I haven't spoken to you about this, but I'm curious because you said you were like the minority in your school, and
not the minority, but it was a big school. It was about 2,500 kids, and it was like a 60-40 split racially.
Okay.
The town that I grew up in was about 75,000, 80,000 people or so. There was only 2 public high schools in it. And the town was kind of almost like out of a movie. It was like there's the east side and the west side, and there's a river that split the town in half, basically. And the west side was predominantly white, east side's predominantly black. And this is in the early 90s when they decided it was too kind of segregated, not obviously by intention, but just historically.
Yeah, it's cultural.
And so they wanted to shuffle the deck a little bit, and so they started busing kids from either side to the other side to mix it up a little bit, and it just didn't go very well. And so it was also around the time where the Malcolm X kind of resurgence of cultural and historical influence in in certain aspects of our society, saw that kind of reemergence, and the Rodney King issue
92,
happened. And so there were a bunch of riots because of that also. And so, it was a bit of a powder keg that way. So yeah, the first time that it happened, really bad, again, I was a freshman. I was coming back from lunch. I was running a little behind. And so, it's a 3-story, high school. I was on the 3rd story. I was getting ready. I swung a door open to hit the stairwell, which is all brick, by the way. And so as soon as I swung the door open, I took 1 or 2 steps down, and all of a sudden, crack, I just got blindsided in the side of my head. And there was about 40 or so students that were
Lord.
2x2 single file running up the stairs, just rioting basically, and just beating the shit out of anybody who was white, and just wrong place, wrong time. And so I got, just gauntleted all the way down 3 flights of stairs, and somehow managed to stay conscious and on my feet, and made it down, and stumbled into Spanish class, all, bloodied and fucked up. And so, yeah, it was, that was an impactful moment for me as far as the drive to go in. But
yeah. And so how did it affect your perception and perspective in terms of race? Because I know at that time too, there's still a little more debate. There's in schools where there's issues like that, they're kids.
Yeah.
So, they have an idea of how they want life to be, and it's never proper. I'm just curious how that affected your.
So for me, it was actually, it was more confusing than anything else, because one of the great parts of my childhood was that, very, very healthy family environment. My parents are still married to this day. And I, even as I sit here now, I've not once ever seen my parents fight, never argue, never raise their voice at one another, almost to like how is this even real degree,
It's crazy.
Yeah. So I've got 2 older brothers, a younger sister, and our family growing up, it was very Leave It to Beaver. Like, we were, I would say, low middle class, certainly didn't have excess money, but we weren't, struggling to keep the lights on. It was just kind of middle of the road. Again, super positive environment. Parents were, it was just such an amazing balance of being just strict enough to keep you between the lines, but not so overbearing to where it fostered a reflexive type of indignance or insubordination towards authority. And so none of us really got into trouble. None of us ever got into drugs or, drinking or, anything crazy.
That's extraordinary too, because you see families that are like that, and there's always one that goes in some direction, or there's whatever. That's interesting.
No, it was an amazing childhood. And so, for me, the downside of that was probably a skewed perception of reality as to how most of the world operates.
Naive.
And so that was really for me was the biggest thing, was just, I was shocked that could happen at my high school, and both of my parents attended that same high school growing up, my, all family members did, my aunts, uncles, you name it. So, it was just weird, it was confusing, and I didn't really know what to think of it, so I wouldn't say that it necessarily swayed me from a race perspective standpoint, in any direction. I just didn't understand it.
Just took you longer to figure out how it really was, maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
At some point.
And the rest of high school was pretty shitty, frankly. I don't look back at my high school years, from a positive standpoint to a large degree. There were some certainly good moments with the swim team and other things, but from that point on, I was pretty nervous going to school, and there had been a few subsequent incidences of, finding myself alone in a bathroom and 3 or 4 dudes come in and it's game on. And so it kind of made you grow up overnight a little bit. And the one thing that I will say that I am actually thankful for, being in that environment at that age, was that it did make you street smart a little bit. It kind of woke you up to, hey, not everybody's your friend, and just because somebody's smiling or being nice doesn't mean that they're not trying to stab you in the back, and look over your shoulder, keep your head on a swivel. It gave me kind of a renewed sense of situational awareness that I just didn't have before, so that was beneficial. But yeah.
It brought that way you were weaned.
For sure.
And it added that other element of real life, I guess.
Yeah, it just wasn't very gradual.
Sort of an extreme.
Yeah, most people, they kind of, that stark contrast is after high school going to college or, whatever. And for me, it was kind of like a light switch. It was one day I went to school and everything was like Disney World. And the next day it was like fucking prison, so.
Sounds like a prison kind of environment.
It was. I mean, like you could score, pick the drug, 20 minutes, you could find just about anything. I mean, people had guns in their lockers, cars were getting broken into in the parking lot, stuff getting stolen. I mean, it was weird, because I think most people think, small town Iowa, you wouldn't have that type of environment or influence. But the thing is, especially the town that I grew up in, which is Waterloo, it's in the Northeast. It's kind of perfectly set in the middle of Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City. So you got 5 enormous, Midwestern cities that have a ton of gang violence and crime. And so a lot of times the lay low spot was staying with family, in our town. And so, we had drive-by shootings and gang violence and things that you just, I think most people, again, would never expect to see in kind of a rural or sort of rural town in Iowa, but it was. So
interesting.
Yeah.
And you mentioned movies in terms of your martial arts stuff. As you got older, were any of the movies that were out then inspirational in terms of getting you to decide that you want to get in the military and do what you did?
Yeah. I mean, all of them really. Rambo, Commando, Navy SEALs, The Rock, which that came out right before I joined. I mean, I was already enlisted in the delayed entry program when that came out. But there's, kind of all the usual suspects, show-wise, Airwolf, Blue Thunder, even Miami Vice, which isn't really related, but still just kind of that running and gunning type of thing. Some of the James Bond stuff. It all was impactful.
So was that a beneficial thing, or because
I think
I know movies are nutso. Some kids, depending on how old you are going to, buy into the whole facade. And then, like you said, even when you come back as an instructor, you see things quite differently. And obviously life is not like the movies. In terms of an inspiration point, it was advantageous then just to get you motivated, and none of your dreams were shattered to learn anything.
No, I think, obviously Rambo and Commando are ridiculously far-fetched. Navy SEALs is to a certain degree, but it's actually surprisingly accurate even today, from a culture standpoint, like the busting of each other's balls and all the silly one-liners, the trust me with your life, not your money or your wife, type of stuff that they would bust each other's balls, and like driving over the bridge and one, in a topless Jeep, and one dude jumps out of the back off the bridge into the water, just for shits and giggles, like dumb shit like that is like, I would say that movie does a pretty good job of capturing the culture of the SEAL teams, of the personalities. And so, I knew Rambo and Commando were not realistic. So no, there wasn't like a huge surprise. The only, and I wouldn't use the word shattering, but the one kind of letdown, I would say, from a expectation versus reality standpoint was, what you do in the regular SEAL teams is a little vanilla for what the expectation was. Like, I think, especially back then when there wasn't online, there was no internet presence to be able to do the research. Now it's probably much less so, but I thought that there would be more Jason Bourne, James Bond kind of stuff, and that's pretty exclusively at SEAL Team 6, so you still do some of that, but it was a little more conventional, not drastically, but there were some more conventional aspects of it than I was expecting. Describe
that, like, for laymen, because you even made contrast between SEAL Team 6.
So they break the military special operations groups. They all fall under SOCOM, which is Special Operations Command. And even that's a little confusing, I think, for a lot of people, because even though we're in the Navy and we're Navy SEALs, you actually fall under the command of Special Operations Command, which is more like its own branch of the military than it is anything else. While it's technically not, it's more like that than it is anything else. So
Okay.
all of the military special operations forces from all the branches fall under that command. And so, um, an example of some of the conventional stuff, like say in Iraq, when we're in what the Army would call in garrison, which is when you're kind of at a large forward operating base where there's command leadership, there's generals, and, that's where it's basically safe.
Yeah.
All of the infrastructure, that's kind of where the central brains of the military are at as it relates to the area of operations. Like making sure that your uniforms are pressed and that you're not in name tagless fatigues. You're not in your operational camis. You're
Right.
in your what we call dress camis with bloused boots, and your boots look good, and you have a fresh shave and up to standards haircut, and your hat's tight, and stuff like that. And then some of the missions too were I wouldn't say boring, but it was just like a lot of observation and, special reconnaissance type stuff
Okay.
where you're observing a target for 3 to 5 days and then you go do a direct action. Whereas while there is some of that at the tier 1, SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, et cetera, there's a lot less of it. They're the guys that it's this high value target. We're going in quick, hitting it and getting out, with every asset known to the U.S. military at your disposal. The tier 3 regular special operations units, there's less of that. It's not that there's none of it.
Right.
It's just sometimes you kind of get the shaft. Like it's kind of like, I would say, if you use like college sports versus professional sports as an analogy, or even within college, Division 2 or 3 versus Division 1, you're just not, you don't get quite the same resources. Like, yeah, you're playing the same game. You've got some guys that are at the same caliber level that Team 6 and Delta Force have, but they have basically a blank checkbook for everything. I mean, for gear, for training, for assets, for platforms. I mean, you name it. But they also have, and this is both units, is that you can't even try to go there until you've been a regular military person for a certain number of years. So
Reasonable.
yeah, so the regular SEAL teams, every time you start a platoon, you are starting with the lowest common denominator. You're always going to have a handful of dudes that are fresh out of buds, never deployed, every time. So you're kind of starting over every single deployment cycle. Once you've done 2, 3, 4 platoons, then you go to SEAL Team 6, and so their lowest guy at least has several deployments, has been a SEAL for 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
Right.
So the baseline of knowledge is going to be significantly higher, and they have everything that they want, and 3 of everything.
And how much control do you have over how some of those operations go? Because it seems like, from a perspective where I was in law enforcement and in a certain division, that same type of thing where we were given hand-me-down equipment and, got the training, but just had to improvise and figure out crazy ways to accomplish the same things that somebody would with all the equipment. Is that something that you were able to leverage your creativity and kind of, step up and say, I want to put my stamp on this operation, or was it all dictated?
I would say it's a hybrid, in that it's kind of a, here's what needs to get done. You guys pitch the concept of operations, so, within the confines of here is the mission, you tell us how you think we should do it and give us 3 options, and then we'll pick one of them. So it was kind of a collaborative effort, which is nice.
Yeah.
And I think, it does 2 things. Is one is it gives some skin in the game and some autonomy for the operators to feel like they're making decisions, because they are.
Yep.
But it also gives the leadership the warm fuzzy of keeping guys kind of between the lines, and not doing just crazy off the wall shit that's going to get everybody killed because they're trying to be cowboys, So I think that's a pretty good balance. As far as the gear goes, I would assume, not unsurprisingly, a lot of it is dependent on who the president is. So like I was in a unique position where I did my first 4 and change years under Clinton. And then I did 8 years under Bush. And then I came back as a trainer, even though I was a civilian. I was back on the West Coast when I was the trainer for the West Coast SEAL Canine program under Obama. And so I got to see, different
3 different administrations.
Yeah. And it was blatantly obvious where the priorities of the government are in each one of those circumstances. So, right after 9/11 and like from 02 or, from 02 to 06, 07, it was kind of the golden cruise box era of, it's like, what do you need? Well, we need boots. Well, here's 5 pairs of them, oh, you guys want to train here? Well, here, you spend an extra week there and stay in a 5-star hotel with max per diem. It was like, it was just, there was so much money thrown at the global war on terror, and especially in those first few years where going from Clinton, where we're kind of bootstrapping things and beg, borrow, and steal and, taking retired equipment and borrowing shit from other platoons because we're doing this block of training and they're not. So we need some of their stuff. There was a lot of that at first. Mm-hmm. Not long after 9/11, the floodgates were open and you could, they would send us as a platoon to REI with a government credit card, and we'd just be like, yeah, we'll take one of these and 5 of those and 6. It was just like,
especially after being squashed for
crazy.
So many years.
You're getting, Mountain Hardware and Arsoteric stuff and Solomon boots. And you're just Garmin GPSs and watches. And, it's like, it was just a heyday, so.
Was there any, I wouldn't say dissension, but was there any like professional discourse or arguments politically? Because there's so much that controls what goes on. And within a team, let's say within, not necessarily organizationally, but within a team, did you get a lot of that?
Zero, which is weird to think of now. I do think that, our entire society has become so hyper-focused on politics and the divisiveness of it that I don't know how it is now. I don't know if there's more talk within the operators in platoons, the guys, the sled dogs that are going overseas doing it. I have no idea if they talk about politics more than they did. We didn't talk about it at all. Keep in mind, the 4 years prior to 9/11, there wasn't really anything to talk about. Even within our society, it was kind of the last 4 years of the naivete that existed with political correctness and not thinking that we could get attacked in the homeland and then we get punched in the face. And so, for a long time after that, everybody was pretty much on the same page too, in terms of what we're doing is right. It's just, we're all, focused on the same thing. And so there was really very little of that. I do know that, especially during the COVID shutdown years and the, booting people out for not getting the shot and like that kind of polarized the communities. And I would say that, percentage wise, I think it's pretty right leaning within the military. There's of course exceptions, but most of the guys who are the kind of tip of the spear guys tend to be pretty similar politically that way. But there's very little talked about it. I'm curious, not to turn it on you, but if it's that way in within police departments, if guys talk about,
and I'm kind of like you though. I've got out of police work about the same time you got out of that too. I think the police departments have an entirely different problem right now. Yeah. It's a lot less political. I would imagine, yes. And I think the same thing. I think police departments usually are bred from people that are leaving the military. It's kind of a transition, career that makes sense for a lot of folks. So there's tons of military guys there too. So I would say it's generally right leaning as well. I'm the guy that I try to avoid politicizing stuff. I love great ideas, and it's just hard to find the people that'll talk about ideas instead of turning it red or blue. So I do think it's discussed, but I don't know how much it would affect the job. Yeah. And it's type A's too, which my next question was about getting people, because you're essentially being sent in no uncertain terms. You're given a mission, even if you have input. The mission is the mission. You must go. So my first question was whether or not anybody was, apathetic or, resistant to the cause, for what they were doing. But if that's not the case, then how did you manage, you either as a trainer or you amongst the team, of taking all type A's to work together, several as, being subordinate to one another essentially. You know,
Yeah.
how does that happen when you take that? It has to be type A deluxe, right? In terms of people they select.
It is. But I would say that it may come as somewhat of a surprise to a lot of people in that even though it's very much that way, everybody is still both receptive to and completely understanding to the fact that there's a hierarchy and it will always be followed. So wherever your position of authority is, you know what you're responsible for, you know who's above you, you know who's below you, and everybody's, at least when my time in, everybody was pretty good about sticking to that. Having said that, special operations is a pretty unique entity within the military in that while that is the backbone of the way things are, there's not only an allowance, but I would say an encouragement to think outside the box, come up with new ideas. So I think that the leadership, again, like overwhelmingly, I had positive leadership experiences. Not every one of them. There was a few that I don't think did a good job, but generally speaking, the SEAL leadership that I fell under did a really good job at encouraging and incentivizing people to do that, to think outside the box, come up with other ideas, and they would listen. Now, they may not implement it. Sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't.
Yeah.
But I think, everybody had a good understanding of, what they were allowed to kind of push the envelope on or not. The other neat thing is kind of in that hybrid of the leadership says, here's what needs to get done. You guys figure out how to do it. I think it kind of scratches that itch or satiates that desire to want to have some level of autonomy and not just be a stormtrooper that does exactly what he's told. And so, because some of these missions are pretty complex and very dynamic and incredibly difficult. And so, there's a bonus to saying, hey, you guys are all sharp, independent thinkers. I don't know how we're going to do this. You guys tell me, and so there was a lot of flexibility for ideas. And there were even times where there was one instance in particular in Iraq where we told our OIC, we're not doing this. He wanted us to go. We had been going way ahead of the 1st Marine Division. And this was in the early onset of the invasion where there were still lines, conventional lines, front lines, et cetera. And so we would go miles ahead at night of where the front lines were and scout out the route that the 1st Marine Division with tanks and APCs and big heavy artillery equipment, et cetera. One, making sure that the bridges were going to be passable, that there weren't any surprises, that none of the bridges or choke points and roads were, rigged with explosives or whatever, and just make sure that it was going to be okay. But there was one night in particular where there were just a bunch of things that were wrong and didn't make sense and didn't seem like they were good ideas. And he kind of had that like, well, they told us we need to do this, so we're going to do it. And once some of the senior enlisted leadership started to really kind of get into the weeds, we were like, we're not doing this. This is stupid. We're going to do this instead. And so we kind of pivoted and said, no, we're not doing that. We're doing this instead. And then he was like, fuck,
he allowed it.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I think, it's one of those things where it is a bit of a blue chip and, you can't do that every time. But as you prove your competency and intellect operationally with leadership, that gives them more and more
obviously
confidence in your ability to challenge them on certain things. And again, like that can't happen very often. And especially when I mean, that's the only time it happened, but I think they're willing to listen when you're not bucking the system constantly. And it's like, no, that like I'm putting my foot down on this one. And we were all kind of in agreement where we're basically like, what are you going to do? Like we're not going, you can't make us do it. You can't make us do what you're asking us to do the way you're asking us to do it. We can accomplish the same goal by doing it completely different. And that's how we're going to do it. And he was just like, fuck, okay, I guess you guys got it, so.
But that's really admirable because, I mean, just leadership in business and everything else.
Generally doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does the leadership, how do you promote within, I know there are people that come in as officers and
yeah.
So how do they develop leaders? Because I know the military has taken shifts from you're going to damn well do it. And, I'm going to
Yeah.
kick your ass until you do it, to a more of a understanding leadership, to the kinder, gentler period of time we went through. So
Yeah.
how did those leaders, or is it a different style of leader that they,
I think
isn't
it's such a results based entity that, the proof is in the pudding. Your reputation and your performance do all of the talking, coupled with, going back several decades. I would say it further highlights the caliber of men that started the SEAL teams and the tradition set upon its inception, where you had just incredible men, incredible leaders, incredible warfighters going through Vietnam for, an over a decade long period that really laid the foundation for the reputation and how we do business as a community. And I think the SEAL teams has done a remarkable job at maintaining that culture and passing it down. And so how leaders are developed is very much a monkey see, monkey do type of application, where young junior officers are inspired and influenced by senior officers who were the JO or the junior officer who were inspired, by the generation, keep going back and back to where, because, the SEAL teams were created in 1961, catapulted right into Vietnam, drinking from a fire hose, right into the lion's den.
Yep.
And they proved themselves over and over and over in that unconventional capacity. And so I think, like I said, they've just done a very good job at maintaining that standard of developing leadership, where these junior officers are put into platoons with guys who show them how to do it.
So it's almost by accident that you had open-minded, strong-willed, but open-minded, team-based leadership. Because, you can be a great operator and be a terrible leader.
Yeah, I think, the crux of how it has maintained that kind of level and caliber of excellency is that hybrid of, we're trying to develop a mission plan for something that borders on insane, or almost, or like there's a lot of people that would say that this can't be done and we're going to figure out how to do it, and so I don't know that I'd necessarily say it's by accident. It's just that we were put into positions where we were kind of having to figure out a way to do something that's not doable. And we managed to do it, and so I think when you surround yourself with that, coupled with the selection criteria, i.e. buds, is that, I had Ben Milligan on my show, who's arguably, he is a former SEAL, and I can't or won't say what he does now for a living, but we'll just say he's still very relevant in that type of realm. But it would be easy to argue that he's kind of the foremost authority from a historian standpoint on the inception of the SEAL teams and the entire history of it. And hearing him kind of outline, he's got a book out called Water Beneath the Walls, which is really good if you're interested in the historical aspect of the SEAL teams and special operations communities. But hearing him walk through how Hell Week was developed for Buds and how Buds kind of came into its own, it was really out of necessity. Is that there were a few missions that needed to be done that were basically impossible, or thought like, if we can figure out a way how to do this, we need to do it. And so that's where the SEAL teams kind of were born out of and managed to pull it off, starting back in World War II with the underwater demolition teams on D-Day. So, some of it I think was just by necessity. I wouldn't necessarily say it was by accident. It was just, this needs to be done. Who can do it? And these guys volunteered to try, and they pulled it off, and that set the standard for everything else.
That makes sense too, because you're not talking about doing a standard type of job function.
No,
it's so extraordinary that you have to have a leadership quality and a team mindset in order to succeed at all. So
and there are, the conventional, Navy War College and, different leadership training programs, but they're more about checking the box for promotion and, making sure that you have the qualifications technically to advance. But where the real bread and butter or where the donuts are made is on the ground with the guys doing really, really dangerous and dynamic missions and figuring out how to do it. And so, trial by fire in that, if a leader is not up to snuff, he's going to disappear really, really quick. And same with the operators too. The tolerance for mistakes and subpar performance is, less than zero. You really don't get any do-overs, and if you fuck up, you may get one more chance if you have a good reputation and have some time under your belt of being a solid performer. If not, you're going to disappear quick, so the bar is so high performance wise, and that never goes away. It's not like, okay, I've got a good rep now, I can kind of back off. It's like, no, your pedal's wide open all the time, and you got to prove yourself and what we call earn your trident every single day, and that never changes. So I think it just kind of self-perpetuates a high caliber of individual in every aspect of rank.
So I can see now how a leader would then be, that leader's accountable for the success of the mission and for the men that they're leading.
Yeah.
So, and they understand what it's going to take. So I can see just almost by default, you would want to hear what everybody else had to say about it.
Yeah. You want as much input as possible. Like ultimately, you're the one making the decision, but not to make everything parallel to dog training, but I've seen that in the dog training industry when it comes to police and military canines, when you have people with, years, decades even of training experience that's only in police and military type of training. And their blinders are on a little bit as it relates to thinking outside of the box when you encounter an operational or behavioral problem or a hybrid of the two. And sometimes you'll find, a 23-year-old female agility trainer, that's doing something that figured out a way to get a dog to get through something that you would have never thought of because you're so hyper focused on this is how we've always done it. And, so bringing in new crops of people from all different walks of life that are intelligent, motivated, self-starter, proactive type of guys. That's why I think most special operations has the reputation that it does, because it attracts those types of people, and it is a breeding ground for innovation that way. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is mission success,
Right.
And to have leadership that says, here's what needs to get done. You guys figure out how to do it. Like there's a lot of power in that, and one that rarely gets exercised. I wish more conventional military and law enforcement, took that same type of approach to certain things, because I think everybody would be better off for it. But
Me too.
But yeah, it was a really, really unique and phenomenal experience.
So do you think that since you talk about the need for interesting new ideas and creative thinking and everything else, how much does diversity play into, and I'm not talking about forced diversity, but I just meant having a woman on the teams, how knowing that they think so differently, could that be an advantage, or how often is that even likely to ever happen? And
I would say I wouldn't discredit that aspect, from a gender diversity standpoint. I think, good ideas can come from anywhere. The asterisk I would throw in is that, the minimal physical requirements to be able to do that job, from my perspective, exceed what, any woman that I've ever met. That's not to say that there aren't some out there that can. I'm sure that physically there are some, CrossFit, high caliber, world-class CrossFit athletes that physically could probably do the training. The one flexibility and I think unique freedom that the military has, unlike really any other aspect of our society, one, it's not a business, so the bottom line is irrelevant. Whether or not it's making money or you're spending money appropriately or whatever, that doesn't really play into account. Yes, there's budgeting, but that can be augmented or changed. To me, you have this unique freedom to ask yourself one very simple question that's going to drive whether or not you do everything. And that is, does this make us a better and more competent warfighting machine? If the answer is yes, then you implement it. If the answer is no, then you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say about adding women to existing special operations units, and I want to caveat, and I'll expand on the existing part in a minute, is that, let's say hypothetically that you find the female or females that physically can make it all the way through training, having absolutely no standards lowered or changed or what have you for them to succeed. Excuse me. And now they're embedded into and woven into the fabric of our regular special operations units. Is that the complexity and the hassle that is going to infuse into the community is not worth adding one or two or a handful of people.
Right.
Yes, it's hard to find, men that can successfully complete the training. But I don't see, if you look at it risk versus reward, it being worth it. Now, here's where the caveat comes in, is that I'm not saying, and I don't believe that women shouldn't be allowed to or be in special operations capacities. I just don't think that they should be put into existing all male units that have decades of only being male units. Israel, I think, is a shining example of how to incorporate that other element, because the reality, especially in the Middle East and in a lot of other cultures, frankly, worldwide, where we're in combative operations, women have an ability to get into places and do things that men can't. And so there's a tactical and strategic advantage to having them in those roles. But I think, and the way Israel has done it, is they have all female special operations units. I'm all for that. I just think that they should start their own special operations entities and be all female. You should keep it with all male and all female, because back to that point of like the extreme double or even triple A personality, if that even exists, that's what you're filled with. And you're filled with, 20 to 40-year-old men in the prime of their life, full of piss and vinegar and testosterone. And now you put them in an environment where they're not around any women for months at a time. And now you throw a very physically capable, physically fit woman in the mix, and it's going to cause problems. It just is, and people can say that it shouldn't, well, that shouldn't cause problems. Well, whether it should or shouldn't is irrelevant. It will, and you can see that on Liberty when guys go out and there's, more guys than there are girls at a bar environment, where that just doesn't mix well, and the way men treat women is different. They're going to be, even if it's completely subconscious, they're going to be held to a different standard. There's going to be accommodations made. Guys are going to try to get involved with her, and even if you make it illegal and say that it's unacceptable, like it's going to
be a distraction.
It's going to be a distraction, and one that again I don't think is worth adding, a couple of numbers to the SEAL teams for that. For that disadvantage. So again, I would just say all 4 female special operators. I just think they should be in all female units.
Yeah, it's a great idea too. It's more than just saying no. I mean, I appreciate, you've thought out a lot of this stuff, and I'm trying to walk the tightrope without getting into anything political or controversial. I didn't mean to like push you to that, but I appreciate you explaining.
No, I mean, I'll give you my opinion on anything, political or not. So yeah, I'm not scared.
Okay, good. All right, good. So what would you say is the single differentiator between somebody who, as a kid, you want to sign up for the SEAL team, you have to enlist and everything else, but your whole idea is I'm going to be a SEAL. So what do you think is the single differentiator if it's not a specific physical fitness kind of a frame?
That is the $1 million question that everybody that I know of within the community and even outside the community that wants more special operations fighters have been trying to figure out. And the short answer is nobody really knows. I can say personally, I think that, one of the, I think more accurate sayings I've heard is it's a common man with an uncommon will to succeed. It is probably the closest thing, but it really boils down to just an absolutely unwavering level of determination to finish whatever your task is, and some people have that in some ways that you think would transfer over and it doesn't. And some people don't have it in ways that you'd think would transfer over and they still manage to make it. And again, as an instructor, having seen hundreds, a couple thousand, well, I'm trying to think how many students went through during my time. It was over 1,000 that tried to make it, and a couple hundred made it over a 3.5-year period. There really is not a common denominator other than a guy that just will not quit. The burning question is why? What is it about him that makes him not give up no matter what happens? And none of us can seem to figure out the exact answer to that.
That's it. Yeah, because we could make a whole lot of headway with that answer.
Yeah, and again, like the Department of Defense has hired psychologists and sports performance professionals and nutritionists. You name it. People who have done all types of data testing and just they've thrown everything at it, trying to figure out what that common denominator is to try to find a more streamlined way to select for it, and just have not come up with anything. So I do have a little bit different theory as to the reason for that, I think, and not to get too far in the weeds from a kind of evolutionary biology standpoint, but I really think in that vein is that, if you look at human beings as a species, for that matter, you look at any species, and, I would ask anybody, what is the primary function or goal of any species? Survivability, perpetuation, right? So with that, now imagine the lack of self-preservation as a genetic code, right? That's funneled into any species' genetic makeup. Is that a lack of self-preservation to me is going to equate to the survivability of a species being in threat,
right,
or threatened by
the demise on its way. Yeah.
So if the lack of self-preservation, which I think is probably pretty apparent and genetically woven into most special operations guys or high-level first responder guys, if that's a common trait in human beings, I don't think human beings would exist. And Darwin would argue that adaptability, and I tend to agree with him, is what survival of the fittest is about: adaptability, not strength. And so for a species to be able to adapt, it can't really lack self-preservation, or you're going to have a bunch of kamikaze specimens that just don't give a shit, are reckless, and we lose as a species. So I really think that there is only so many percentage of the population that possess all of the required traits, coupled with enough athleticism and coordination and all of the kind of things that need to be there outside of just pure genetic makeup, that exist in a way where they're all together, and you're presented with an opportunity to go to training, and you volunteer to do it, and you have the desire to do it. And so I think no matter how hard you try, there's just only so many people that have everything in the level that they need to do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's always going to be that way.
It's an A-level personality. So do you find yourself, I always would be in a situation where it was really traumatic, whether bullets are flying or it's just a grotesque scene or a whatever, and at work you just have a different frame of mind, where I feel like if I'd driven up on this circumstance, let's say body parts everywhere, whatever, things that I'm sure you've experienced, it would affect me differently on a personal level if I was just Joe Civilian driving by it, versus being in business mode where something needs to be handled, or somebody needs to be defended, or we need to cordon off things. I need to assign people to do this or that.
Yeah.
Did you find that you had kind of that split personality? Is that sort of a survival mode, or do you find that's where PTSD kind of comes into play with a lot of the guys who have seen all that stuff and just can't make that separation?
For me personally, no, I did not experience or kind of realize any type of compartmentalization in that regard. I think, again, going back to kind of the genetic makeup of the guys that have all of the different things that need to be there to make it through, it's kind of a hard wiring to a certain extent, you're always kind of in that frame of mind a little bit. Of course, there are, I wouldn't even say exceptions. I would say there are levels to it, where, especially when you're deployed. And I think that's one of two big differences between military and law enforcement is that, when you're in the military, one, your rules of engagement are far more lax, and there's a lot more leeway to be a cowboy than there is here in the United States as a law enforcement professional. But also in that, when you're in the United States, your training. When you get on a plane and you land boots on the ground somewhere overseas, like you're always switched on there, and that never turns off. So there isn't that 12 hours of being switched on and 12 hours off. It's 6 months on and then a year and a half off. But even with that, there are certainly times where I rolled up on, bad car accidents or, saw things, in society that if you had a trigger that was going to put you in that mode, it would do it. And, to me, I never felt like I was really going back and forth. I always just kind of felt like it was more hardwired and kind of always there. But
just knew it was something that you were able to tolerate. That's it.
Now that's just me. Obviously, I can't speak to anybody else's experience, but that's, reflecting on it, that's what makes sense to me. But
that's interesting. So what got you into the dog thing? Because now you're an entrepreneur, you've got a business and everything else, and I'm super curious to get into that and how your previous experience in the military affected all that. But how did your interest in dogs come about? Yeah. And tell me a little bit about how that transition happened.
So growing up in Iowa, I was inundated and fascinated by duck dogs, mostly labs and retrievers doing blind work with, retrieving ducks, and duck hunting is a big popular thing in Iowa. And I never got super in the weeds with it. I had several close friends who them and their dads had, 4 or 5 dogs and did a lot of duck hunting and whatever. So I was around it, but never really a part of it. But I was always fascinated by it, but to a degree where I think goes beyond the scope of what most kids would think of and appreciate, which is kind of I was awestruck by the capabilities of the dogs. A lot of it was from kind of an olfactory standpoint of just seeing dogs like walking. We had a black lab growing up, and walking him, in the middle of winter and seeing him like air scent something and then trail it for, 15, 20 feet and then head snap and would dive down 6 inches under the snow. There's like a half-eaten ketchup packet or something, you're just like, what the fuck? Like, how is that even, and so I just marveled at something that stupid. And that fascinated me and made me really interested in that aspect of it, as well as their ability from a physical grit standpoint of them being able to, break ice and get in the water and not hype out and, run through, thorn bush, or gnarly fucking scrub brush that would, deter us from walking through it, and they just plow right through it. And just their personality. I was just, I think a lot of kids growing up, like dogs and are dog kids growing up, but I was at a different level, a higher level of my fascination with them. And then when I was in Iraq, there was a bomb dog that saved a group of Marines in the area, in one of the areas we were operating in. And that was the light switch moment for me that, growing up being very passionate and interested in dogs, and then seeing that, and that was just kind of this instant handshake of, passion and work. And I was just like, I need to get into this, and couldn't get enough of it. And so for the first several years, it was all a hobby. It was just something I was interested in. I was not doing anything with it in the military. And at that same time, after I'd gotten into it real heavy from a hobby standpoint, then I went over to be an instructor, and it was, where we were putting kids through Buzz was basically co-located with the kennel facility for the West Coast Multipurpose Canine or SEAL Canine program. And so
that's serendipitous.
Yeah. So I introduced myself to them, started, doing some training with them and just hanging out with them and watching training and just not really getting involved in an official capacity, but just being around it and being interested in it and asking questions and talking with the guys. And then ultimately, I went on a training trip with them through this decoy course and did some other training trips with them. And, And then that's when they offered me a position as a handler, which at that time, I had already bought my property here in Texas, had planned on getting out because I had gotten the lung disease called coccidiomycosis or valley fever, and I'd lost 40% of my lung capacity. They tried to medically retire me or offered to medically retire me, and I kind of weaseled my way out of it to wait until I could get a college degree and have both my kids born, and then was at a big crossroads of, do I stay in and be a handler, or do I stick with the plan of getting out and starting my own training company? And two things were at play. One was I honestly was not confident in my ability physically to be able to continue to do the job, given that they tried to medically retire me for my lung condition, which, still exists to this day. And, the last thing I wanted to be was a liability to any of the guys. And so that was a big doubt I had, a big self-doubt I had. But then the other thing too was I've generally taken the what's going to give me the most bang for my buck approach in big life decisions. What's giving you the most juice for the squeeze kind of thing. And I felt like as awesome as it would be to be, with a dog and go overseas and do canine handler deployments, I felt like I could make a bigger impact and do more good owning a company where we're training dozens or hundreds or thousands of dogs and handlers and people. And so it was a tough decision, and it's one where I wouldn't say I regret not being a handler, but that's for sure one thing that I would have loved to have done at least once. But, I didn't, and the reality of it is if I had, I probably would have stayed in for the full 20 instead of 12, and I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now.
Yep.
Wouldn't be in the position I'm in, so I don't look at it negatively or again, like a regret. It is something that I wish I had done, but I certainly don't dwell on it because, it's not like I can change it. So,
right.
But yeah, so, going back to when I first got out, which was at the end of 2008, started the company in the fall of 2009, and have been doing it ever since. When I first started out, it was pretty hyper focused on government contracts, military working dogs, police dogs, even explosive detection dogs. And for that first half a dozen years or so, it was pretty solely or exclusively geared towards that. Started the Warrior Dog Foundation kind of out of necessity. There were a couple of dogs that needed to be retired, and they were going to euthanize them if me or none of the other guys in my position would take them. So I just said, shit, I'll take them.
Yeah.
And so that, again, it wasn't some plan I had. It was more out of necessity. And so I just did it. And now it's turned into where we've, taken in hundreds of dogs and have been going for 15 years now. But
how do you leverage those dogs? Are you just caring for them, letting them do their thing, or do they have a task? It seems like those kind of dogs would want to be doing something still.
Yeah. So, I mean, in official capacity, no. The key is just like with human beings is good nutrition, lots of time outside, sunlight, exercise, physical stimulation, and some sort of mental stimulation. The nice thing with a dog is that you hear that a lot. People are like, oh, my dog needs a job. He's bored. Mental stimulation is mental stimulation. You and I can rationalize and put a title on having a job. Dogs just need to be mentally satiated. And so as long as you're accomplishing that, which we do, then the dogs are in a good place and it's not a problem. But it is a lot of work taking dogs in, because the dogs that we take in are all ones that have bit people they weren't supposed to, and kind of got to a point with their entity where they opted to euthanize the dog instead of continuing to try to work through problems or whatever. That's where we step in and we take them. So, we're getting the Hannibal Lecters of the dog world right out of the gate, And so all of my, pretty much every one of my staff members, with only a few exceptions in the last 15 years, have all been bit, most of them several times. And it's not a nip where it, kind of breaks the skin. I mean, it's like put you in the hospital with 90 stitches, type of bad, so, I mean, I've been bit a bunch of times too, but, so it's dangerous, and you got to recruit people from, significant or specific backgrounds that, it's not just, a mom and pop doggy daycare place with, flimsy kennel panels. It's, it's built like a supermax prison and everything's epoxy coated concrete with rebar reinforcement. And, it's a lot of work, and it's dangerous. But, to be able to walk up to the kennel facility and we have 30 dogs, 30 spaces that are always full. We have a waiting list of, a dozen or so dogs at any given time. To be able to walk a loop around and see 30 sets of eyeballs that are looking at you, and that, if we hadn't taken them, they'd be dead right now, so it's super rewarding. It's tough, but it's rewarding.
And you make it sound easy too, like, well, I just jumped off and decided to just, start the company and train thousands of dogs. So how much of that entrepreneurial journey did you leverage some of your skill set from either childhood or the SEALs? Because entrepreneurs also are kind of a rare breed, and most people can't do it. And as we know, most businesses fail in the first 3 years, 90%
Yeah.
And you obviously have beaten that. So how did that happen in terms of just building it from the ground up, and what did you leverage to get that?
I think that, I didn't know anything about business. My degree is in criminal justice, so a lot of it was trial by fire and learning the hard way, where I think I leveraged skill sets from upbringing and the military was just in that I don't care how bad it gets, I'm burning the boats, cutting the safety net away, and I'm moving forward and I'm not giving up. And I've had a very unique opportunity in selling personal protection dogs for the last 15 years, also to high net worth individuals, where just kind of along the way and it was a completely unintended consequence, something that I didn't even realize was happening until several years into it. But a lot of the lessons learned and strategies that I applied to business, I really picked up from customers. I have, sell a handful of dogs every year for 15 years. It's a pretty decent Rolodex of very powerful, very successful individuals who have a lot of experience and a ton of wisdom. And it's such a unique business transaction. It's really unlike anything else in that, especially for people that are in that high net worth kind of category, they have their houses remodeled, they have staff, they have maids, they have nannies, they have, groundskeepers, they have assistants that live with them, personal chefs. I mean, you name people that are in their house, see their day-to-day intimacy kind of stuff. But the big difference between all of those people and the dog is that, I'm adding a family member. So the amount of trust that they have to basically just hand over to you is that you're putting a dog who, is a family member who also is potentially dangerous to their children. Like, you got to trust somebody pretty significantly to allow them to do that. But you're also seeing these people, unlike, say, remodeling somebody's house, like, you're in these people's bedrooms and their kitchens and what have you, but not while they're there. You're not interacting with them, so now it's like I'm teaching their kids, I'm interacting with their kids, I'm teaching them, I'm teaching their wives how to handle a dog, what to do, what not to do. And you're seeing these people when they first wake up in the morning or when they're putting their children to bed. It's like, it's such an intimate transaction that there's a lot of trust that's built very quickly.
Yep.
So in that same vein, inherently they're all business guys. They love the game of it. And so, as we're going through the turnover process, a lot of the discussion kind of in between teaching, what I'm trying to turn over to them, it's, so tell me about your business. What do you do? What are your goals? What do you want? And after 15 years of that, you glean some pretty significant insight as to what works, what doesn't work, what the parallels are, the commonalities of people who are successful versus not. And I would say that's the biggest parallel between, SEAL teams or special operations and super successful entrepreneurs, is that they just will not quit. Every one of them, has gone through multiple bankruptcies. They've been in positions where they're putting their power bill on a fucking credit card.
Yep.
To try to survive. And this is 10 years into it after they've owned 3 businesses that made millions of dollars, and then they lost everything, and these are guys that just, it's like quitting and failing isn't an option, or, failing is just a pivot. It's not a finality. And so, reaffirming that mindset as being one that's really necessary and crucial for being a successful entrepreneur, coupled with really, really intelligent and wisdom and experience driven ideologies and strategies to approaching business, and realizing that there isn't really a playbook to it, which is what I find probably the most enjoyable and fascinating about entrepreneurship, is that, all of that burden rests on my shoulders, which, while stressful, there's nothing more rewarding than when you're the guy that has to make the decisions and you're the zero or the hero and you make it.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, and there's a lot of adrenaline, and I think that's where a lot of law enforcement and military vets struggle, is when they stop doing that and they do something really mundane that's not exciting. It's depressing. You go from, having your life on the line day in, day out to, pushing papers, selling health insurance or whatever. And
right.
That's hard for a lot of guys, understandably. And so the neat thing about this is it replaces that itch and desire to have exciting, exhilarating, a lot of shit on the line, lots of pressure that I have to perform under. I still get to experience that.
It's different risk.
Yeah. But I'm one of the types of people that, like, I need that to a certain extent. Obviously there's an unhealthy degree of it. But yeah, so I guess kind of circling back to the question is that it was a combination of those things, the wisdom and guidance that I've gotten from some amazing entrepreneurs along the way that have been clients of mine, coupled with, spending from 18 to 30 in the SEAL teams is a pretty unique and beneficial time to be around, a couple hundred seasoned combat veterans who are really showing you how to be a man and be an accountable performer. And, so all those things combined, it's just kind of the perfect storm for success. And so, I will say, I owe any successes that I've had to a lot of people. I've had a lot of help along the way, with whether it's really incredible teams that I've been fortunate enough to have around me, or people who have given me really, really sage advice and guidance to be able to navigate some of the uncertainties of business that I really just didn't know how to handle. So definitely wouldn't be here without both of those things at a high degree.
Yeah, being humble and curious are some great attributes that you have also that a lot of people lack.
No, I appreciate it.
So So I remember when, we started doing our security thing. It was a different aspect of it when you're doing private wealth protection. And so everybody that was fascinated with the business was like, oh man, must be in all this EP training and you're doing all this, I'm like, no, I'm trying to figure out how to run a business. Yeah. Like my level of study is completely in a different area that most people would think. Yeah. Did you find yourself doing that? Because you obviously had to train yourself how to be really great at training dogs also. Yeah. But then once that's over, did you find yourself just diving into books and talking to people to learn business more than anything else? Or
yeah, I mean, sort of. I guess I would say, just like with a lot of things, maybe even most things in life, with dog training, you really never stop learning. It's kind of like jujitsu in a way, in that the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. There is I think not a breaking point, but a happy medium where you kind of feel like you at least have it figured out, where you're good enough to where you don't feel like you're an imposter, or like, fuck, I'm in over my head. I don't know what I'm doing. Like there's certainly for years feeling that way, like, man, I don't know what I'm doing. Not as a business owner. I mean, because I grew up with it and spent years as a hobbyist first. I mean, like I wouldn't have started the business if I wasn't at that point, even then, of feeling like I understand it enough to where I feel comfortable putting my family on the line. I'm not going to do that haphazardly. So, but even then, it's like I still continue to learn even now. Certainly not at the same learning curve as I did in the first 5 or 6 years, but every dog I train, I learn something. And so, it's more paralleled than it is like, oh, I'm not really focused on dog training from a specific standpoint, and now I'm hyper focused on business. I put myself in a tough position where I didn't really have a choice. I had to do both, because you're still having to train dogs and put on seminars and work with police departments or military units. When I went out, my company that I started, I got the training contract for the West Coast Multipurpose Canine, SEAL program. And so, going out there similarly, it's like, you're not taking your foot off the gas as a trainer out there, but still having to do business development and contract bids and website design and, answering calls with, potential clients, customers, whether it's government or private, so the first several years, I was the kennel master, the kennel hand, the ranch hand, the landscaper, the business development guy, the social media guy, the fucking, the secretary, the accountant. I did everything.
Yeah.
And it was tough, but I'm glad that I did that. And, not to piss on anybody who, gets handed a better opportunity where they have a big investor that, dumps a ton of money and kind of shows them the ropes. Even, I had, some of that early on that it ended up biting me in the ass more than it helped, but it was still a good learning experience. And, but the thing that I would say is it's kind of like, I think to be a successful entrepreneur, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I would say that it's enormously beneficial to have been in every step of the process and have done everything that you're going to be hiring somebody to do at a level to where you're going to know whether or not they're good at their job or not, or good enough to stay on. And I think it's kind of like, bringing you or I to manage McDonald's when we've not been the fry guy, we haven't done any of those jobs. Like, you need to know every job that you have within your umbrella of your business or businesses, at least to a high enough degree to where you know if somebody's cutting the mustard or not.
Yeah, not to mention the lack of respect you get
right
when you try to hire somebody, tell them what to do, and they know damn well you have no idea what they're supposed to do.
So it was beneficial in that regard. And so, as I continued to learn dog training wise, and again, even to this day, still continue to try to hone my skills, the business aspect, was really drinking from a fire hose for the first several years. And I made plenty of mistakes. Looking back on it, I still wouldn't change anything, because I know what I know now because of the struggle, and I know I wouldn't appreciate where I'm at now near as much if I hadn't struggled the way that I did for a number of years. And, it certainly wasn't an overnight thing. Like I said, I've been doing it since 2009, 16 years, come August this year. And I'd say for the first 10, it wasn't until about 10 years into where I really felt like, okay, I think I have this thing figured out, business wise,
right.
Dog training wise. Like I said, I kind of
feel like the business is stable at the very least.
Yeah. To where it's like, okay, I got a good handle on things, and kind of no matter what happens, we'll be able to figure it out,
Yeah. That's great. Great feeling though.
It is. And it's life changing, because the stress that when you have a family who's dependent on you succeeding and you're kind of going all in, and especially going from such a disparity of where I came from. I did spend about 9 or 10 months as a company man for ExxonMobil right when I first got out, just as a springboard out to start the dog business. But it was basically like the military in terms of safety, security, benefits, longevity, et cetera. So to go from being heavily micromanaged, where everything is dictated and, your paycheck is this and you're going to get it on this day. And, here's the expectation, everything you're told, everything that you need to do and what you're responsible for, to where now there's a complete absence of that.
Yeah.
It is a huge kind of slap in the face almost, or a wake up call of like, holy shit, like I'm at the helm for all this stuff. And like, yeah, I can take off whatever days I want and I make my own schedule. And, that's, I think, kind of the funny paradigm shift that a lot of people see, and they're like, fuck, you can take whatever. And it's like, yeah, you can, but
you won't.
But owning a business is like doing prison laundry. You never run out of things to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and that's one of my favorite movie scenes of all time as it relates to the entrepreneurship is of all movies, American History X, where Edward Norton is in prison and he's kind of shooting the shit with this black guy. And it's a weird, scenario to begin with, because you have this skinhead and this black guy like being friendly with each other, but Edward Norton is getting all frustrated of trying to fold laundry and get it done faster and whatever, and the other guy's like, dude, chill the fuck out, like it's not going anywhere, like no matter how much you do, they're just going to drop another fucking load in your table, so just chill out and fucking go through the process and whatever. And I think as dumb or simple as that may sound, there's a lot to that, being an entrepreneur, and especially even now. I mean, I've had people like, dude, take a vacation. And, I've taken some vacations over the years, but it's difficult for me to do that. It's easier now because I have very capable, brilliant teams. I mean, I have, I have 5 businesses, and each one of them are their own entity, but they're synergistic. And so, I do have some employees that wear different hats for more than one business, but each business has, its own set of employees that manage certain things for me. And, so because of that, I can now take some time and whatever. Some of it is having kids at home still. When I no longer have kids at home, that will be a chapter turn also in that regard. It will be easier to travel and kind of take some time for me. But the point I'm trying to make is that especially early on, when you're several years into being an entrepreneur and you're burning it at both ends, you're super stressed out, and people can tell, your own family's like, dude, you got to throttle back a little bit. This isn't sustainable. And you're like, I don't have a choice. That 0 to 50 is not the same from 50 to 100. 0 to 50 is a kick in the nuts all day, every day. And you don't get to take a break. And I couldn't, I wouldn't want to, it's like, even if somebody paid for me to go on a vacation, I'd be a basket case the entire time, staring at my phone, wondering what's not getting done and how far behind I'm going to be when I get back. And, and so, you hear that a lot, I think, on social media with, some of the Tony Robbins types of, entrepreneurship conferences and stuff, and talking about life, life work balance, and there isn't any at first. I don't know how you could make it if you're starting from nothing and kind of the guy doing it without a lot of help. Even with a lot of help, it's difficult. So,
yeah, I totally agree. And I remember my first catastrophic event at work happened when I took my first vacation in year 5.
Yeah.
So it's like, and so, you can imagine okay, I'm swearing off vacations again too, right. So everything falls apart. Of course, Murphy's always around somewhere.
Yeah.
So before we get off of the dogs stuff, what is something that is potentially untapped? Because I've heard you talk about the extraordinary abilities that dogs have, and you've leveraged them for different things. You may have your specialty, but is there something out there that's been untapped in terms of something that somebody could do with dogs that hasn't really been leveraged yet?
I mean, there's nothing that comes to mind that hasn't been leveraged yet at all. I would say that there are some detection capabilities that I don't think have been leveraged near to the degree with which they could, on a large enough scale to where it's super impactful. I do need to be careful in how in depth I get into what those are, because of the national security implications of, if some of the techniques that I'm talking about doing, it would give you insight as to how to try to defeat them. So I'll navigate it in this way, where I will say that, from a detection standpoint, there are, I believe, some brilliantly developed detection capabilities that enable dogs to search, we'll say, like container ships from overseas shipping, an amount or a volume of them that would boggle your mind. I won't get into how that's done, but that's the thing that comes to mind the most, I think. And a secondary one, which is, I've actually talked about this on 60 Minutes 15 years ago, but the way to use choke points, funneling, and cordoned off areas in association with, I think that it's actually a patented term now, which is vapor wake, which, so maybe I shouldn't even use it, whatever. The gist of it is air scenting for explosive detection, target odor, and then sourcing it with a moving target. So let's say somebody carrying a pressure cooker bomb in a backpack, training dogs to locate somebody who is walking, as opposed to it's planted in a trash can by the door or whatever. So a lot of similarities in training wise, obviously, as anybody can imagine that does anything with dogs. There are some differences, but anyway, my point is that specifically as it relates to like the Boston bombing, because when I was on 60 Minutes, it was right after that happened.
Oh, yeah.
So they actually flew me into New York to do an interview on how did this happen? How could we prevent it in the future? And I talk about using that type of air scenting explosive detection training technology, which it's been around a long time. But basically, like, let's say you have, we'll say the Super Bowl, since it's coming up. So you use a buffer zone where you cordon off the area around it far enough to where if it's a vehicle borne or a foot, or, human foot traffic borne IED, that it's not close enough to affect the inside of the event. Whatever that safe blast distance is, you've got a cordoned off area around it entirely. Now that's sealed. And you have choke points, however many you can man, going in and out, and everybody that goes in or out has to go through these choke
Monitor
points.
that ingress egress, or limit it to where it's
Right.
not so porous, right?
Yeah, and then you're putting these air scenting explosive detection dogs at those locations so that anybody who's carrying anything, they're going to pick up that odor trail at locate source and
Long
identify
before
it.
they could
Yeah,
detonate something. And
right. And that needs to be done several days in advance. So once it's cordoned off, you sweep the entire thing with a team of explosive detection dogs, EOD professionals. Okay, it's cordoned off. We can, with relative certainty, guarantee that the interior of that is safe. Now anybody coming or going is going to be, air scented by explosive detector dogs and what have you.
so is it a numbers game still? It seems like my perception of it is it seems underutilized even for the general intention, whether it's narc dogs or bomb dogs or whatever. It seems like there's just so few of them within each division or department or whatever.
Yeah, it is. I mean, because here's the tough reality is that, if you take law enforcement, which is overwhelmingly going to be the tasked personnel to execute things like that, how often are they doing explosive sweeps? Never. Unless the president's coming in and Secret Service says, hey, we need augment, we're doing a big area.
Special events.
Yeah. So, even big police departments usually, they may have a couple of bomb dogs, but they're going to have, 40 narcotics dogs, because what's happening? Well, they're running dogs on cars all day long and in schools and, meth houses and whatever. And so the bulk of law enforcement from a state, local, and even federal municipality standpoint is primarily narcotics detection. Now, to your question, yes, it's a numbers game. That's a big part of it. I think the solution is having a federally funded mobile task force that does that, that basically you're in charge of doing events. I would kind of T&E it with that and then say, okay, now let's kick it down to the state level where each state now has a unit that's what they do, right? So you've got a federal unit that maybe has a handful of independent groups that can go do that for any given event. That writes the playbook, sets the tone and protocols for now.
Or your SOPs and all.
Yeah. And then that trickles down to now every state, depending on state, California, Texas, New York maybe would need more than one unit, but then that way the states have some skin in the game, and that's how you're going to increase your numbers. The nice thing about those dogs too is they don't have to be pointy-eared bite dogs. They can be labs, retrievers, Springer Spaniels, Patterdales, you name it. And so your ability to have those kind of numbers is drastically increased. Whereas if you're saying this dog needs to be a dual purpose bite and detection dog, the number of dogs that have the genetics for that high level of detection work and that high level of apprehension work, those are hard to find. There aren't tens of thousands of those on the planet. There's not even, there's thousands, but not tens of thousands, and those thousands need to be on the street with law enforcement and in special operations and military units and such. So if you're just doing explosive detection, you can use any dog that would pass that selection criteria for a detector dog, which there's lots of those. I've actually pulled dogs out of pounds that have gone and worked for TSA for airport bomb dog security. Not a bunch of them, but a few of them.
That's cool.
So
it's a cool story.
Yeah. So, to me, like they're out there, usually the dog that's a total pain in the ass as a pet and gets surrendered to a shelter because he just has too much drive and his nose is on the ground like an anteater all the time.
Jumping out of the Jeep off the bridge into the ocean.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. So, yeah.
So I'll pivot a little bit, and I know your time is limited too. So I want to make sure I cover. I'm curious about your thoughts on the new generation of people and how it affects, military training and the amount of discipline it takes, bleeds into entrepreneurship, bleeds into AI, and not to be critical of new generation because it's just so entirely different that it's difficult for each generation to understand the next. And we all have shortcomings with each new generation anyway. But it seems like the generation, since you have daughters and, you grow up getting instant answers to things, we used to, my son said it was something, he put it perfectly. It was like, I have some kind of a blissful ignorance to what I could accomplish so that I could follow my dreams and have this vision of what I could become, because I haven't seen, if I wanted to be on stage with this famous band, that's great. But if I see 8, 10-year-olds outplaying me, then I'm discouraged all of a sudden. And these kids see this every single day, what they can and can't do. So they grow up differently. And the work-life balance, one of the other guests, when you talk about Powers that was here, you talk about, you're interviewing people and they talk about work-life balance in their first month, so there's just a different idea of how work needs to be accomplished. And yet we know some of those old school standards that you're describing that you came up through are part of a necessity of life. And there needs to be some kind of collaboration. So how do you square all that in terms of raising people in this generation? Do you feel like you've learned a lot about how that is and how can we bend to accommodate that? Or do you think it just has to be this has to be an old school, somebody has to jump back to a previous generation and go back to swing the pendulum in order to have success?
I'm actually, and this may surprise people, I'm actually very encouraged by subsequent generations for 2 reasons. One is going back to what makes SEAL candidates successful. I think that, the type of people who are driven and proactive and self-starters and whatever, I think it's largely genetic. And this isn't a nature versus nurture. It's more of they complement each other. And that, one of the biggest things I've learned in both dog training and in special operations is that, you'll be able to relate to this more than most people that I explain this to, but genetics are the amplifier, right? So say you have a 5-watt amp or a 200-watt amp, right? The power that you have in that amp is what it is, right? The equalizer, right? So the power, the wattage of the amp is nature. Nurture is the equalizer. Those are the sliders that you're adjusting tone and gain and mid and bass and whatever. And that you have control over, right? You don't have control over the wattage. It's fixed.
Right.
And so with every individual and dog, like, you're always going to be limited by their genetic potential, no matter what, right? No amount of training is going to exceed somebody's genetic potential. And just like there's only so many people that have all the characteristics that have what it takes to be a Navy SEAL or any other special operations or high-level first responder, there are only so many people that have all the characteristics that are genetically woven into their code that are going to allow them to be entrepreneurs. And I think because technology has advanced so much over the last 2 decades, and you and I really can't even try to comprehend what it would be like growing up now versus when we did. I don't think it's even beneficial to try or to really even make comparisons. And it's really more about, figuring out how the game works now and being encouraging and instead of, and I'll be the first one to admit I've been guilty of this for a long time until fairly recently. Of back in my day, what was the Clint Eastwood movie where he's the old...
Oh, yeah, Get Off My Lawn.
Yeah, whatever. I can't remember the name of them.
Gran Torino, yeah.
Being that kind of just salty old grumpy fuck that, says you guys are, whatever. There's, of course, some of that when you see kids doing the dumb shit that they do, but rest assured, the generation ahead of us thought the same thing about us. They saw us in the 90s with, pink hair and grunge haircuts and lip rings and riding skateboards. And they're like, dude, our world is fucking doomed.
Yeah. We just didn't get recorded, fortunately.
Right. But I think we did all right. And I think they'll do all right, and I think one of the nice things and for me, an encouraging thing about Mother Nature is I think she has a way of self-correcting as necessary. And I think you even see that in our society culturally right now. You're seeing a kind of rebranding of what people want and values that they want instilled in their families and things of that nature, and it ebbs and flows and it roller coasters up and down a little bit. But I think that there's some brilliant young Gen X or Gen Zers, and I don't even know what the next one is, but millennials, Gen X or Gen Z. Is there another one yet? I don't know. What is
Alpha?
it? Alpha.
Yeah. I mean,
that's maybe a bit of a misnomer. I don't know if they should be called alpha, but I say that jokingly. But
I was going to say, you just undid everything you just said.
Yeah. Obviously, it's in jest, but no. I am encouraged by there's a lot of innovation and there's some very brilliant young minds out there that kind of that same like thinking outside the box with e-commerce and AI and things that I think we don't understand to the degree that they do, are able to take advantage of some of these new technologies. And I think it's an exciting time for humanity. I think you got to be careful. But I'm not worried about it. And I don't view it as like all hope is lost and as a species that we're spiraling the drain. I really don't think that,
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that too. Like I said, because inevitably we have to figure out how to coexist and be encouraging, because we're all still part of the same group. Yeah. But
to be clear, I do think some people still need their ass kicked. And there is a time and a place for that. Pain is a universal language, and sometimes that's the only one people understand. I don't think you should default to that. I think setting, just like with dog training, setting up an environment where it's easy for the next generation, kids, dogs, whatever, to learn and do the things that you want them to learn and do, and then positively reinforcing that should be the majority of the interaction. The analogy I like to use in dog training is, with young kids, it's like if you're trying to teach a child algebra and you put a book down and ask them to, work out a few problems and they get them wrong and you smack them. How likely are they to learn that material in a way where it's beneficial and it's deep seated and it's positive and they can go far with it if they're basically trying to do it to avoid being punished.
Right.
It's not a very ideal learning environment. So whereas in the transverse, if they get something right, they get a donut or they get to play on their iPad or, whatever it is, they're going to be motivated and incentivized to learn. Now, the caveat is if you put the book down, or let's say you say, hey, Johnny, I need you to clean up your room. Fuck you, Dad. Now you need your ass kicked. There needs to be a consequence for that, mm-hmm. But to me, that's the balance is that, when somebody's pushing boundaries super disrespectful or even to a dangerous degree out in society, then I do think consequences matter. And in dog training, there's the pure positive trainers that only do positive reinforcement. They do no positive punishment. They don't even withhold rewards. It's only, when the dog does what I want, he gets rewarded. And I think it's a flawed system for most dogs. I think there are anomaly dogs out there that you can get away with that. But if you have a young, driven, a personality dog that's very capable, there has to be a balance, and it's the yin yang, and the idea of good without the presence of bad doesn't really work. If all you eat is ice cream and steak, that's going to get old after a while, and same kind of thing. It's like good isn't really good without the context of bad. So, not to get too far off on a tangent, but I do think that relates because there is an element of keeping our society capable that I do think there needs to be some more consequences than there are. I didn't try to just do a basic instinct moment with my leg crossed there, but probably looked like it. I was trying not to hit the microphone.
Don't use that camera on that.
No, I mean, throw it in there. I think it adds for the comedic value, maybe, but
just don't put it on my face because I didn't want. If I got caught looking, I don't want to be in that.
Meat gazer.
All right, so some random questions, some quick ones. One, you're a serious dude, but you're inquisitive. what cracks you up? Because I would love to know.
The Office type of humor.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, to me, like, I can't think of a more brilliantly written show that I think is actually a good litmus test for whether or not I'm going to get along with somebody, is if they understand, appreciate, and love that type of humor, we're probably going to get along well. If they watch it and they're like, I don't get it, I can almost guarantee we're not going to hang out.
Yeah.
Just plain and simple, But I think types of comedy and the different types of comedy says a lot about, your personality, and not in a bad way. Like, I'm not clowning people that don't like The Office. I just, in terms of who I'm going to probably get along with, I love sarcasm, really dry sarcasm. I think that's kind of a Midwest thing. My dad is masterful at total smart ass dry sarcasm that if you didn't know it, you'd be like, the fuck is his problem? Well, but he's not serious, like, ever, So I just love that type of humor.
More of a sophisticated, awkward.
Yeah. Like, the super lowbrow, obvious, dumb entertainment stuff isn't really my bag. I like the more kind of intellectual, you kind of have to know. Dennis Miller, I think, is another good example of, I mean, even there's plenty of times where he'll say something, I'm just like, dude, I don't even know what the fuck he's talking about, but I think that kind of educated humor is fun.
Yeah. It's more fun. I think I always like comedians that you can't emulate.
Right. Yeah.
You just say, dude, I'm not even going to tell you why it's funny. You just have to check it out, because there's no way I could do it justice as opposed to a joke teller or something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what kind of music? And we touched on this a little bit, but obviously I'm a music guy. I was a musician before I cut all my hair off and did the police work stuff.
Can we get a picture of you with long hair? Do you have any of those?
Oh, I do. I've got some.
I'd love to see that. For me, pretty much everything except most country. And this may unpleasantly surprise people. Actually, of the country that I can stand, it's more of the pop, shitty country that most people that like classic country hate. And I don't like much of it. There's a handful of like Chris Stapleton songs, which, not that he's pop country, he's kind of an anomaly in today's day and age.
For sure he is.
But just some of that, like Sugarland, type of catchy, a couple Jason Aldean, so, like, again, I know that a lot of people who are purists in the country, like they absolutely abhor that type of music, but most country, I just don't like it. Especially kind of the old school traditional stuff that the purists would like. I find it, for me, just very depressing and not enjoyable. Like, I can appreciate the talent, but I like music that like kind of from a dopamine standpoint spikes it as opposed to brings it down. And so really anything that has that effect, that really like just gets you fucking going, whether it's, most of it I would say is heavy metal, hard rock. The 90s heavy metal is a huge genre I'm into and have been ever since. But even some of the 80s hair bands I definitely like, and some of the 70s more classic rock and roll, Led Zeppelin type stuff. I really love classical music. I've got to be in a certain mood for it, but like, I'm not going to lift to classical music. But
so you're describing kind of gym music, really, right?
Yeah,
something that just kind of gets you.
Yeah, for the most part, even hip hop or gangster rap. Some of the older stuff, I do find myself being kind of irritated by some of in the last really better part of 10 years almost. It feels like some of the newer rap stuff to me doesn't seem as talented. It probably is, and maybe it's just me getting older, but when I listen to, like back in the day, guys like Rakim or, Ice-T and Ice Cube, or, even NWA, or like Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg back in the 90s. Like, I like that kind of hip hop, I guess. Some of the stuff nowadays seems more like breathy and kind of a hybrid between R&B a little bit, and I just find it kind of irritating. But what else? I guess I'm not really into jazz either. Some of it, I appreciate the talent, but most of it, and this maybe is a reflection of a sliver of OCD maybe I find jazz irritating.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's like, and there's actually a funny line since we were talking about The Office, where Angela, somebody says like, "Oh, it's stupid." And she goes, "No, you're not stupid. Jazz is stupid. Just play the right fucking notes." And I was like, "Holy shit!"
They got that from Spinal Tap.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Well, that's news to me.
Play all the wrong notes.
Yeah,
Right.
So to me, a little bit of off the cuff improv that way is cool.
Yeah.
When it's so overdone to where it's like I can't even make sense of it, then that's when I don't like it.
Yeah. Everything has that. I think there's a point in any art where, if you're really into it, you can get educated enough to where you can actually hear and understand it. That high level musicians are just compelled to keep pushing, boundaries and hearing other things. There's people with some crazy ears that can just hear all kinds of stuff. Again, I also played ignorance on some of that stuff that sounds like noise that somebody can appreciate. Yeah. So they can hear it.
And I think, the last better part of 10 years of a lot of the rock and heavy metal stuff to me all sounds the same.
Mm-hmm.
For that matter, even the band names are all kind of the same. Like there's nothing really distinguishable about them. Whereas, to be a teenager in the 90s, and to me, what is kind of the true mark of a great band is if it's on the radio. And even if it's a song you've never heard by them, within 4 or 5 seconds, you know who it is by the sound.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like it's so overproduced and digitized and whatever, is that it all kind of sounds the same to me.
Yeah.
Alice in Chains, you know what they sound like. Nirvana, you know what they sound like. Soundgarden, you know what they sound like. Metallica, Pantera, it's like
Van Halen.
Yeah, it's such a unique, and there's so much personality and kind of personal flavor to those bands.
And they're kind of innovators too, that you're talking about too.
Yeah.
They've kind of moved the sound into a completely different direction.
Yeah.
That has been stagnant. I mean, you say 10, 15 years, I'm thinking, man, maybe 20 years, 25 years even. At some point it just got really, really redundant.
Yeah. I think the digitization's made a big difference, because if you go back to, I think what made all of those bands so unique was largely the tone, right? From a guitar standpoint, back then when you have a pedal board, like there's obviously millions of combinations that you can put into a system, whether you have a Marshall or a Mesa Boogie or, an Orange or, whatever brand you're talking about, they have such distinct sounds. Now you can get a Spark and download any amp you want. I mean, there's thousands of combinations in one box that's this big with an app connected to it that you can make it sound,
But you'd think that would diversify it more.
You would think, but it tends to wash it out to all just end up sounding the same, So I think that's part of it. I think that's where technology, for as awesome as it is in some ways, and I think where something like the Spark actually is beneficial is maybe for more guys our age, where I always wanted an orange cab with an orange amp that distorts it like that British Crunch, awesome sound, or the triple rectifier Mesa Boogie, just crazy, zero mid, all bass and treble, and you're scooping the mids to the point where it's non-existent, and it has such a unique heavy metal sound, and just like to have that, like you had to buy the whole fucking setup,
right?
So it's like, if that's what you had, well, that's your sound.
Yeah. Not to mention in your house, part of the whole sound is, I mean, you can turn on a Marshall, but if you're playing it on one, it's still not right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, part of the sound is the overload.
Right. Whether it's, you're heavy on overdrive, I mean, whatever it is that, now it's like it all just kind of ends up being the same, which sucks, but, I'd be curious to know if, guys in their early 20s now, have favorite bands, I mean, just something as simple as buying CDs or even cassette tapes and the album art. It's like, when was the last time you saw an album come out where you could look at a picture and know that it's that album?
Yeah.
It's been 30 years.
Or we used to memorize we knew all the people in the band.
Yeah.
This is a 6-piece band, we knew who the keyboard player was, because that's kind of what and that might be old manish also, but I think music is going to retroactivate a little bit. And I see a little bit of a movement now where guys are coming out saying, hey, we just did this gig, no click, just, 3 dudes, playing some blues or whatever. And there's kind of a beauty to that. And I think, the pendulum swings a lot, even though we're moving forward. It kind of, people start to appreciate, because if you can create a tune without being able to play an instrument or even sing very well, then I think there's going to be a movement to support real musicians again.
I hope so. Yeah.
I think at least a cult of us might have that appreciation.
Yeah.
So you started playing guitar at what point?
It was early high school years, 8th, 9th grade. I wanted a guitar for years, and my parents were not going to get me one. So I mowed yards for a few summers and saved up enough money to go to a pawn shop and get a shitty beat up Fender Stratocaster and a little PV practice amp. And there's no YouTube at that time. Didn't take any lessons, so I'm listening to songs that I liked and trying to figure them out, and sucked. And it took forever to learn, even basic like Nirvana's like "Come As You Are." It takes a month to figure that out when you have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah.
And but that's how it started. And I wouldn't really say I was in a garage band. I mean, there were 2 groups of guys that we kind of messed around with it a little bit, but only really played a handful of times together, and we were horrible to the point where we didn't even want to keep going, so except the drummer. The drummer was phenomenal, and he, I think, is a professional musician
still
now.
Playing, that's great.
But he was so far ahead of us. It was just like, dude, what are you doing here? Like, go somewhere else where the guys that you're playing with are going to be, closer to your caliber, because this isn't that group.
So you still play around a little? I saw a guitar in your studio, so you just
I still play around. Yeah, I still play around a little bit, and with the invent of YouTube, that's made it pretty handy to learn songs that I've wanted to play or learn. And I still, I can't read music. I don't know a bunch of scales. Acoustically, I'm not really a chord guy. It's more electric and more like cool rhythm stuff that I like. The occasional partial solo that's easy enough for me to figure out. So it's really just a hobby. It's not, I don't take it too serious.
Well, that's the beauty of it. You get to do the parts you love and whatever.
Yeah,
if you ever decided you wanted to learn how to read music, YouTube will still be there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I still enjoy doing it. I have one at the studio. I have one in my house, and I'll pick it up, once in a while and just mess around on it and have fun. And I still definitely enjoy it. But whether or not I would, maybe at some point in the next few years when things settle down a little bit personally and professionally, kids, business wise, then maybe I would put a little more time into getting better at it. I could see myself doing that maybe.
Cool. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Let me know when you do.
I will.
I'll check out anything you do.
Yeah, I appreciate it. If you had to pick one amp, right, and not a Spark, a traditional tube amp, is there one amp that you would?
Well, the only one that I bought was that Marshall, because I just have, and I'm not a good enough guitar player to really justify having a bunch of amps either. I was I was a musician by profession, but was a studied drummer and learned keys because I went to school for music and stuff like that. And then once I got older and started getting back into music and realized that even old people, the singer's still going to show up 3 hours late for a session, and all, I just said, screw it. So then I started teaching myself the rest of the stuff. So it, like you, it might take me 5 times as long to complete a tune, but now I'm just writing and recording my own tune. So
that's cool.
I always wanted that Marshall sound, and I thought it would be, that's just the ideal sound, but I also have a great appreciation for what a Les Paul sounds like versus the Strat.
Yeah.
But I think the Strat kind of gives me a little bit more of that funky option, and I still have the the DAW with all the different plugins and stuff. So again, I have the Marshall, and that's what I'd say. I just have that Infinity Tour, but I'm older too, so if those Marshalls were all the rage, coming in through that mid and late 70s from the Who and Kiss to Van Halen before he got his own
EVH 51 too.
But he was starting out on Marshalls, and just the walls of sound that he had in those late 70s were just fascinating to me. So all right, was there anything that you're working on that you wanted to bring up, mention to anybody?
I mean, really just, it's all the same stuff that I've been working on. There's nothing new coming down the pipe. Obviously the Mic Drop podcast, I've been putting a little more time and effort into, just trying to be a little more consistent with it.
It's really successful. I mean, you're doing something right.
Yeah. I mean, I think, guest selection is everything, and I think, that's really what sets the stage for quality content or not, is having people with good stories who are engaging, charismatic, good storytellers, and that people want to listen to,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what makes a podcast good or not good, I think, but, so there's that, there's the Team Dog online training, the Team Dog food, treat, supplements. Those two are things I continue to work on, especially the dog food is something, we're going into our 4th year, and that, a lot of things are kind of transitioning into that being the main focus from a big business standpoint.
Cool.
Then I have, obviously the Warrior Dog Foundation that I still, oversee and is on my property, and, kind of handle all that. And then the personal protection dog. So it's still all the same stuff I've been doing. And I'll just continue to keep doing that until I either don't have to or don't like to, or maybe both. And yeah, just kind of continuing.
Well, I'll link all that stuff. So obviously we have all that kind of stuff. So, hopefully our audiences are different. I'm fairly certain they are, which is why I think it's great. And I appreciate you. I know you're a great storyteller as well, and have a lot more than we could cover in a couple hours to talk about. So I appreciate you, being able to bend and not break, and not be able to just spit the acronyms and look across the room at somebody with a quizzical look on their face.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the same vein, I appreciate you having me on, because I've done enough other shows where it's so hyper focused on SEAL training and my experience in that, and a little bit of it is cool, I think, especially when it's tied into other stuff. But
of course,
for me, it's very refreshing and enjoyable to do one where it's not just so hyper focused on like the in the weeds military stuff, because I've just already done so much of it. So it's nice to answer other questions.
I know there's a lot more to you. So hopefully we learned a little bit more.
Yeah. I'm pretty simple.
All right. Well, you have badass gifts. So this is the best that I can do. Cause usually what I'll do is, and you're not too far from me, but usually a taste of Fort Worth. So I know you're not a big time sipper, but you say you sip with your dad. So I'm going to give you 2 things. So,
oh shit. Am I going to get in trouble on the way home with them?
If you open them. So,
oh wow, that's awesome.
The first one, that's a Fort Worth company, Blackland whiskey, and I don't know if you like rye or not, but their rye is fantastic. They have a really unique taste.
Awesome.
And I don't know if they're going to be, a big dog one day or not, but I really quite like them. Yeah. So I'll give you that, and then the other one was actually a surprise, because this one's for you and your dad.
Oh, shit. Well, thank you. Yeah, there's a company called Templeton Rye that is right by where I grew up that's real popular. Well, shit, you can't go wrong with Blanton's.
Yes. So
man, that's very kind.
Take the horse and, open that and share that with your dad, because I know, maybe it'll last a long time, because
No, it for sure will, and it will definitely be enjoyed immensely between he and I. So that's very kind. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you being here, brother.
Yeah. Thank you so much. My pleasure. Awesome. I'll try not to dip into those on the way home, but
please don't.
What's it take? What you gonna do? What you gonna do? Successor of the sandbox with second grade rules. A confident fake to make you do what they want when they won't pay the fool. A diplomatic face is the one to see you through. And don't let those bigots take you off your game, but just to let them loose. You sit here in the front seat, baby, ain't that sweet?